So this is an unsolicited response to Shafe in his response to Backwoods from a comment about Shafe's take on the fall of man. Great video, great question. I would say, starting with the things where we seem to be 100% in agreement with. The world as we currently live in it is in a fallen state. No matter how you slice it, even when things are good for us, it's by far what we would call the Garden of Eden. You know, we don't wake up in the morning and naturally all of our needs are met and everything is good. I can't fully disagree with everything that Shafe says in his video. He makes some very good points, and I would say you make good points in how I understand what you mean when you say the Bible not being in literal form. I can't help but feel when I hear that, though, a laissez-faire interpretation of the Bible, I feel, opens the door for heresies, cults, to the point where, say, a preacher getting up at the pulpit, you know, he sets up a homily and is using the words in a way that serves a narrative, if that makes sense. So if you go too far down the Bible being allegory, there's the danger of losing the point. And I'm not saying that you did that in this case, Shafe. I don't feel that at all. I disagree with your conclusion about the fall of man being an allegory to describe man's self-awareness. But I do follow, and I do understand where your conclusion came from. You did a good job of describing that. The reason I disagree is because God and man, Adam, had a relationship. And in the Bible, I believe it talks with them walking together. And we can look up what the Hebrew word for walking is and follow that definition. I do not believe that it's the type of relationship a parent has towards a child. I do not feel that God's reasoning behind creating mankind had to do with him wanting a parental relationship. Based on my study and what my heart tells me is that the parental relationship as we know it today is something that needed to be developed later, as we had to find a way to bridge us back to God, which according to the Bible would be Christ. I agree 100% that there's a lot of misinterpretation of the forbidden fruit. I've heard it before being described as carnal knowledge, being as if, you know, Adam ended up having sex with Eve and that was the big fall. As it is an allegory, I believe in our minds, it's important before we think of it as an allegory and begin picking it apart piece by piece, is to actually explore the parable in its completeness and then interpret it from its completeness. And that's the one thing that I would give pause with how you approached it. I feel like in the way I understood what you were saying, you broke it down piece by piece as we were going through it. So there's a couple of big takeaways for me in the fall of man. And studying the Bible back in the day, I remember, being an early professing Christian. Prayed the prayers, got dunked in the water, but then there's this big, thick book that I agreed to as a result of all that. And I remember going for years just staring at this thing. And I remember going to a Baptist church that used the King James Version and attempting in my youth, because this was pretty early on, say 7-8 years old, when I accepted Jesus into my heart. So we're talking very early on, but all these years go by and I never read it, and I never read the Bible. We're talking cover to cover. And it honestly wasn't until I was on some kind of a strange, so my mental condition being bipolar, I was on some kind of a mania, and my mania took, like many mentally ill people it took a religious path, and I read through the Bible actually several times in several different versions. Not really the point of my story, and I'm not saying it to brag, because honestly it was my mental illness that allowed me to go through the hundreds, if not thousands of pages. But the first time I read about the fall of man, and I'm reading through it, this is a level of spiritual maturity. I read through it the first time, and when Adam, after he partakes upon the fruit, realizes that he's naked, realizes that he did wrong, and is hiding behind a bush, and God calls down to Adam, "Where are you?" I thought it was funny the first time I read through it. Now, if we take a very literal point of view, and this I'm explaining to kind of reinforce where you're coming from, but we're talking about the completeness of the situation too. I thought it was funny, because how are you going to hide from God? I giggled, had this self-righteous aura about where I was spiritually, feeling I'm in the fold with God, and I think it's cute that this other, I interpreted Adam as a person, thinks that they can hide from God, and it's silly to think you can hide from God, which it is, obviously, silly to think you can hide from God, because we all know what's coming for us, right? Not even the second time that I read through, I didn't laugh the second time. Third time I read through, I cried my eyes out. Because of that separation you were talking about, Shafe. It wasn't that God was playing games with Adam. They weren't playing peekaboo. God couldn't see Adam anymore because of his now sinful nature. Like, there was that created that quite literal separation. And there's a lot to Adam's sin that caused that separation, and I think it goes beyond self-awareness, because Eve partook of the fruit first, according to the Bible, gave it to Adam. When God called Adam out on it, what have you done? His response was, she made me do it. He couldn't confess his own sin. He couldn't confess his own situation. Now, I do see too, with the self-awareness thing, once he partakes of the fruit and God's having a conversation with himself and saying, now he is like a God, knowing good versus evil. But as far as awareness goes, we don't have the personal experience to really determine what is good and what is evil. I mean, I think about my own life, and I can think of countless occasions when I was going through an experience. I would swear this experience was evil, but if I looked at it in totality, it wasn't evil or bad or anything else. So to me, it's a lesson about how man lost his ability to live in the present tense. He lost his ability to live in a fourth dimension, or even possibly lose his ability to live in a second dimension, if we want to think about this as a self-awareness thing. So a self-awareness person, say, lives in the third dimension, as you're saying, but Adam lost the ability to live in the second dimension. When you're talking about, you know, if man was 5 and now he's 6 and God is 7. But I think it's more along the case of, we were in the fourth dimension, got moved into the third dimension, and at that point, God couldn't see us. But then my understanding of a fourth dimension is, from a fourth dimension, you can see things in the third dimension. So I don't know, man. I do not know. But truthfully, the idea behind the story is that there was a separation, and then eventually the Messiah is given to earth by the grace of God for man to have this way back to the original existence. And I don't feel that when we perish, we become no longer self-aware. I think it's more similar to what's now referred to as a flow state. But good video. I appreciate what you say, and thank you so much, because it got my mind thinking of things that it should be thinking of instead of the things I normally dwell on, and I appreciate you for that. I also appreciate your sharing the things that you have. It's been super interesting as a friend to see how God has had a hand in your path, and I'd love to one time hear the story about the change, because you know, when you first turned back to the way, for lack of a better term. I mean that in as gentle a way as possible, because I can tell you from my own experience, I'm honestly, from a God believer kind of way, you serve Shafe as an example to me about how God's timing is really what's in control here with how a person conducts the path. Because I can remember there's several times in our long friendship where we ardently disagreed on the existence of God, or how salvation occurs. But I'm very thankful that isn't the case, and I'm also very thankful to have the platform to talk about things like this. And thank you for the video, and everybody else, sorry if I bored you. Sorry if the good Sunday talk burned your ears. That's a terrible joke. I shouldn't have said that.